Bungie's first year since breaking off from Activision was a bit rough for Destiny 2. Shadowkeep was by far the weakest fall expansion the franchise had ever seen up to this point, and the 4 seasons that took place during the year were pretty hit or miss. But by the end of Season of Arrivals, the game was in a pretty decent spot thanks to numerous quality of life changes that took place over the course of a few seasons that fixed a lot of the issues that came with Shadowkeep at launch. And the amount of content in the game was finally substantial. And even though most of the seasonal content was inaccessible, the game was big, and it felt pretty good. But very impactful changes would be coming very soon in November with Beyond Light. But let's back up to when Beyond Light was announced. June 9th, 2020, which was the same day that Season of Arrivals launched. The Beyond Light reveal stream began with a cinematic trailer showcasing the Drifter, the Stranger, and Eris gathering on Europa to investigate the massive pyramid. It's one of the best cinematics for Destiny 2 with a very Star Wars kind of vibe to it, and really gave off the impression that the Pyramid in Darkness storyline that began during Shadowkeep would be picking up a bit more. However, in the next scene of the reveal, Luke Smith and Mark Noseworthy would reveal that the story is focused around Aramis, a fallen leader who wants revenge on the Traveler for turning its back on the fallen race, and would be wielding a dark power from the Pyramid, Stasis. Now, the Pyramid in Darkness storyline was obviously connected to Beyond Light's story, but as we'll discuss in a moment, it didn't quite feel like a continuation of Shadowkeep in the way players likely expected. But before these guys explain too much of the story to us, we got our first look at Europa and some in-game action of Beyond Light. Europa looked like a pretty unique destination filled with varying type of locations, not just one big frozen wasteland like we saw in the cinematic. New enemy types, wyverns and brigs, Stasis, a new power that we'd be able to wield, and a deeper look again at Aramis. But here are some of the major bullet points that Mark and Luke would make throughout the duration of the stream. Number 1, Stasis won't just be a subclass, but also a new element for weapons and enemies to use against us, making it the first new element since 2014. Number 2, Beyond Light is the beginning of a new era. I mean, how many times have we heard that before? However, with 3 expansions being announced this time, Beyond Light, Witch Queen, and Lightfall, maybe this new era actually meant something this time. Number 3, Bungie is all in on Destiny 2, reiterating that Destiny is going to be continually building on the MMO aspect of the game. And we'll see what they mean by that, because in a lot of ways, the decisions made in Beyond Light actually help the case for why Destiny 2 is not an MMO. Number 4, changes to the seasonal model to get some of the FOMO out of the game.
Bullshit!
Number 5, Transmog is coming to the game at some point during the year. Number 6, 60 FPS and 4K for PS5 and Xbox Series consoles, along with free upgrades to those consoles from the previous gen, and crossplay between previous and current gen consoles. And now probably the biggest change coming in Beyond Light that would also end up being the most divisive. And I'm just gonna let some of it play out here.
Each year, just as a new expansion comes out, we're going to cycle older, less actively played activity and destination content out of the live game and into what we're calling the Destiny Content Vault. Moving content into this vault is going to allow us to add support for D2 for years. This vault is also going to allow us to take content from Destiny 1, do some work on it, get it ready to come back into the Destiny 2 ecosystem. There's a lot of great content in our past, and maybe this year we'll see a classic raid come back. I think it'd be pretty amazing this year to see the Vault of Glass kind of unvaulted and returned in front of players. Like, I can imagine things like champion Praetorians instead of just regular Praetorians, and kind of updating it slightly to the modern context.
This fall when the expansion comes out, not only are we going to be bringing back Cosmodrome and adding Europa, but we're going to look at some of that content that's been in the game for a long time, that's been free, that isn't actively played, and that's when some of that is going to be vaulted.
The Destiny Content Vault, as Bungie has named it, removing heaps of old Destiny 2 content to allow for better updating and patching of the game. This supposedly massively multiplayer online game just lost the massive part of MMO. 4 destinations and the Leviathan were being removed, 7 strikes, 2 Gambit maps, 11 Crucible maps, 7 Crucible game modes, and 5 raids. A massive amount of content that helped the game feel big and full of things to do was now all going away. And on top of that, 18 exotic quests were being removed, including 2 of the best ones, the Whisper and Outbreak missions. And with all this content being vaulted, it would also include the removal of a lot of the campaigns, including the Red War, Curse of Osiris, and Warmind. And fan favorite seasonal content from Forsaken's year would be leaving as well, like the Forges and Menagerie. Beyond Light was set to remove half the game. Now, nobody expected Beyond Light to replace that much content one-to-one, but could it make up for the loss of this much content in the fact that maybe we wouldn't notice that so much was being removed? Well, we just have to wait and see. In October, we get a Vidoc going a bit more in depth on what to expect from the expansion. Europa would have a dynamic weather system, snowstorms and things like that. We gotta look at some of the new exotic weapons and armor that look to be centered around build crafting for your Guardian a bit better. New Light was getting a bigger update and additions made to it. More quests, a new NPC, more of the Cosmodrome from D1 would be added back to the game. And we saw a bit about the season that would be launching alongside Beyond Light. Season of the Hunt. Osiris was back, and so was Uldren, now resurrected as a guardian named Crow, finally catching up to that cliffhanger 2 years ago in Forsaken. Xivu Arath was going to be the villain of the season, in a sense at least, corrupting various enemies in order to build an army, and gave us a little bit of a tease about Savathûn. But we didn't have to wait too long before November 10th came, and Beyond Light launched. First up, let's kind of talk about the campaign. There were 5 story missions with a couple busy work filler missions in between, and the length of the campaign was padded out a bit by increasing the power level of the missions pretty drastically so that either the mission would be really difficult, or you would need to stop your playthrough of the campaign for a minute and go grind some power level. This isn't really a problem for players who can handle a tougher challenge, and some would even say the challenge was just right, but for others it kind of interrupted the flow of the story and campaign by needing to grind power level at separate times throughout. The story missions weren't too bad from a gameplay perspective though, some fun boss fights and things to explore on Europa. There was some good dialogue from the Stranger and Varix, although Drifter and Eris were oddly quiet during the campaign, which felt a bit odd considering how much both Eris and the Drifter, but especially Eris, had been involved in this Pyramid Darkness storyline up to this point. Aramis was an interesting villain, but like most Destiny expansions, we rarely get enough time with the villain, and Aramis' storyline was wrapped up pretty quick, at least for now. The cutscenes were nice to look at, and having Varix back was pretty cool, but the campaign was kind of just there. There was much more interesting stuff relating to the lore and backstory of Europa and the Stranger in the post-campaign content. Empire hunts were similar to Shadowkeep's Nightmare hunts, however Empire hunts were more of just altered story missions, whereas Nightmare hunts had us visiting areas outside the campaign a bit more. Other quests that would have us explore more of Europa were some of Varric's missions that had us defeat Aramis' successor and other threats around the area, and the Stranger had some pretty tedious quests that were needed to be completed in order to unlock Stasis, aspects, and fragments, and these were kinda awful. Very grindy for the sake of grind, and took forever. But there really wasn't a whole lot for the post-campaign stuff. There wasn't some kind of Altars of Sorrow or world event equivalent for Europa, so the area seemed a little bit dead while in patrol. It was a beautiful location, just with not much to do, especially once you'd finished the post-campaign quests, which didn't take all that long. Beyond Light brought one new strike, the Glassway, which took place on Europa, and I think I can speak for everyone when I say that this strike just kinda sucks. Although they did bring back the Destiny 1 Omnigul strike along with most of the Cosmodrome, and seeing additions like Lost Sectors to the original Cosmodrome is pretty cool, just like it was during Shadowkeep with the Moon. But there really wasn't much else to the Cosmodrome, with its only use so far being a place to serve the New Light experience. And only one new strike hurt quite a bit after losing 7 of them. I mean, even Shadowkeep gave us 2 strikes. Beyond Light did not bring any new Crucible content. No maps, no modes, which again hurts after losing 11 maps, and Shadowkeep brought us 3 maps. And I think it goes without saying that Gambit didn't get anything new and became even more stale after losing 2 maps. And to top it all off, there wouldn't be a dungeon like we'd had in both Forsaken and Shadowkeep at launch. So far in terms of core activity content, it was quite shocking to see that Shadowkeep outpaced Beyond Light so far. And it definitely felt pretty bad when most of the core gameplay loops stayed the same with Beyond Light, farming bounties and running core activities for pinnacle drops. And while we did have a new toy, Stasis, farming the same old strikes and Crucible maps, it wouldn't be so bad if we didn't have to interact with them, but leveling was and still is tied to the core activities almost exclusively. So almost no new content for them, and removing so much of it just felt bad. And especially when Season of the Hunt was very core activity focused, but we'll get to that in a minute. But speaking a bit more on Stasis, Stasis was strong at launch for Beyond Light. Overly strong, which was fun for PvE. It's obvious some classes were stronger than others, but it did bring some different kinds of playstyles to the game, which was nice. The subclasses were customizable, similar to how subclasses were back in Destiny 1. Unfortunately, stasis weapons weren't really a thing. There's only one stasis exotic weapon and no legendaries, and it was a bit sad to see a new element added to the game, but only for subclasses really, and not our weapons or armor affinity. This would be addressed in later seasons, but for now, it felt like we got an incomplete version of this new element. But in PvP, stasis was a nightmare. Getting frozen constantly got old after the first day, and I don't think I'm alone in saying that Crucible was nearly unplayable because of it. But probably the biggest highlight of the expansion would be the new raid, Deepstone Crypt. Taking place in an area that has been teased about in the lore for so long and had some really interesting implications for certain parts of the narrative, and from the gameplay side of things, the raid did not disappoint. It had some really unique encounters that stretched beyond the more formulaic ones from the previous raids. The boss fights were mostly well done, though Atrax could be a little bit boring, but the final boss Tanyx was a really fun fight. However, I do want to make the point that Tanyx being the raid boss is probably one of the most disappointing and hilariously awful things about this raid. Inside the crypt could have been anything, a giant exo of Clovis or something, but nope, it's just Tanyx, a dude we've killed 3 times already. I will never get over how stupid that is. But again, from the gameplay side of things, this fight is actually pretty fun. The loot from the raid also wasn't half bad at all, and Deepstone Crypt had a great atmosphere as well, having one of the best jumping puzzles in franchise history, and not really because it's difficult or anything, but of course because of this. Deepstone Lullaby is one of the best soundtracks in Destiny history. Now let's kind of shift back to some of the core game stuff again. Not only was content vaulting introduced into Destiny 2, but gear sunsetting was introduced as well, making all the gear earned prior to Season 9 no longer infusable. This means Shadowkeep stuff was also completely sunset. This was a pretty divisive issue that players debated over the course of many months prior to Beyond Light's launch, and while to some extent sunsetting made sense and did have a good enough reason to exist on paper, Bungie absolutely overdid it, which they would later admit and try to solve with a band-aid fix the next season by reissuing Dreaming City and Moon weapons, again also to much backlash considering they didn't just unset our current ones, meaning we'd have to go regrind for those exact same weapons. It was just a bad situation all around. But for now, at least during this launch period Season 12, there was no solution, and the loot in the game did not feel good, especially when there was not nearly enough weapons to counteract the pain of losing so much. Again, like vaulting, players didn't expect a 1-to-1 trade-off in content, and 2, nobody expected 1-to-1 weapons and armor, but players definitely expected a bit more than what we got. Especially when even the Beyond Light campaign rewards included things like Forsaken's Long Shadow Sniper just reissued. It was pretty bad, and loot for the core game was just incredibly lacking. Ritual weapons had been removed over the last few seasons, which a lot of people didn't really like, so with Beyond Light, Bungie would try to solve this a little bit by just giving us one ritual weapon, Adored, and this could be earned by any of the 3 core activity vendors just with a different skin applied. And this was pretty disappointing for a number of reasons. For one thing, Adored was just beloved. Sure, it had some decent perks that made it kind of an all-purpose sniper rifle, but it looked and felt just like our beloved, which had just been sunset. So really it just felt like we had to regrind for a new beloved. The armor for the core vendors was also the exact same across all 3 of them. Beyond Light did not bring any new weapons or armor for Iron Banner either, which also was just another disappointing thing to add to the list for the depressing state of loot. And even Trials of Osiris wouldn't receive new weapons or armor, but it did finally see Adept weapons added, which was nice to see. However, adept mods wouldn't be received too well due to them also giving you drawbacks on your weapons, like -10 to one stat to increase another by 10. And adept loot in this current form still just didn't feel like it was worth going flawless for a lot of players. Beyond Light and its season did bring some new exotics though. 7 exotic weapons, 2 of which were Destiny 1 weapons, and 6 exotic armor pieces. The exotics were mostly a mixed bag. Some of them were a bit forgettable, but some of them actually became very popular, and were super badass like Lament and Cloudstrike. One of the more positive side effects of sunsetting and vaulting was the reduced load times and general performance boost in most cases. The lighting and graphical changes were nice as well, and things seemed to be running a bit smoother. However, I do remember specifically trying to run Vanguard strikes and having various amounts of glitches that prevented us from progressing through the strike, and that was something that only happened from Beyond Light onward. At least for me, that's what happened to me. So not all cases did the game run smoother. But now we get to Season of the Hunt, which launched 7 days after Beyond Light. Xivu Arath was building an army of corrupted enemies around the various destinations, and we need to put a stop to it. Wrathborn hunts are the new activity where you fight some of Xivu's champions, and it wasn't all that challenging or exciting, pretty much just stomping bosses in 10 seconds or so. The thing is though, in order to do these Wrathborn hunts, you need a charged Cryptolith Lure. And how can you charge it? Well, running core activities. Really not a good look when the core activities just did not get hardly anything new for Beyond Light. And so for half of the seasonal activity gameplay loop being centered around grinding old content, it was not good. The loop was essentially run a few core playlist activities, then go kill a few Wrathborn bosses in under a minute. It was really not good. I think this may be the worst seasonal gameplay activity we've ever seen. Even now. At least you could use the lure to grant you specific loot drops, similar to the Chalice back during Season of Opulence, but it had some layers of RNG added to it that were just frustrating to deal with if you were chasing specific loot. Now it wasn't all bad, there were a few bright spots within Season of the Hunt. The Hawkmoon exotic quest wasn't half bad, and contained some pretty cool story and lore, and it was a fun mission. And the Harbinger secret mission that would give you the catalyst for Hawkmoon and served as a place to farm for random rolls was actually a really good mission. It wasn't nearly as good as Outbreak or the Whisper mission, but Harbinger was pretty decent, all things considered. Season of the Hunt's story wasn't completely terrible either by any means. It gave us some good moments with Crow, and we learned a bit more about Xivu Arath and Savathûn, but even with these few brighter moments in the season, Hunt was still one of the weakest we'd seen overall. An extremely lacking gameplay loop, pretty bad loot, and was hurt by the lack of core activity content in the game. The last real thing to happen in Season of the Hunt was the Dawning, and this year was pretty much no different than any other year. It brought along a new fusion rifle, which was fine, and a unique exotic ship with some customizable elements to it, but this year's Dawning also gave us another community event. This one tied to baking cookies and generating Dawning spirit, and similar to the Season of the Worthies community event, Bungie overestimated how many players would be grinding out the event, again, where players were set to fail the event before the Dawning was supposed to end. But Bungie did what they did during Season of the Worthy. They increased our spirit gain by 3 times in order to help us achieve the goal. Either Bungie should have recalculated how many players they think will engage with events like these, or they just need to let us fail them, not just coddle us and give it to us in the 11th hour, because then it's not even like we earned anything as a community. Community events like these could be really cool, but first of all they need to be rewarding, like very rewarding, and secondly we need to know what that reward is, so we can truly generate enough buzz amongst ourselves as a player base to actually rally behind them. But community events like this are truly terrible, where failure is impossible and the reward is just not worth it. Okay, so wrapping up as a whole, Beyond Light and Season of the Hunt was a bit rough. There were some pretty cool things added in Beyond Light, the raids, Stasis, at least for PvE, and some of the story related content was above average. Season of the Hunt had the Harbinger mission, which was neat, but that's its only real highlight. But when we take a look at what Beyond Light and Season of the Hunt brought and compare it to Shadowkeep and Season of Undying, Shadowkeep did outdo it in a lot of areas, especially when it comes to core activity content. Shadowkeep had a dungeon, where Beyond Light did not. Shadowkeep had 2 strikes, where Beyond Light had 1. Shadowkeep had 3 PvP maps, where Beyond Light had none. The Moon destination had a wave-based horde mode event, and Europa didn't have anything similar. Shadowkeep brought new armor sets for Iron Banner, 3 ritual weapons, and had a much larger loot pool overall, which is surprising, but true. And Season of Undying's activity was far better than Season of the Hunt in terms of gameplay and loot. And again, it's very surprising, because people didn't like Undying's activity, and thought it was a pretty weak season. And in a lot of ways it was. But when you compare it directly to Season of the Hunt, it makes Season of Undying look like a masterpiece. Beyond Light did bring Stasis, a new subclass and element type, and Europa was brand new rather than Shadowkeep's Moon being a reprisal from D1, but were the trade-offs here worth it? It really depends on who you ask. Considering Beyond Light and Season of the Hunt was $50, and Shadowkeep and Season of Undying cost $35, I think it's fair to make comparisons where Beyond Light really falls short in terms of the amount of content that it came with. And when you pair that with vaulting and sunsetting, Beyond Light really felt pretty bad for these 3 months. And again, that's not to say that what did come with Beyond Light was all bad, because it wasn't. But it was much smaller than many of us expected, and in some ways even smaller than Shadowkeep, which was pretty bad, especially when you consider Beyond Light was the most expensive fall expansion purchase we'd ever seen. The Beyond Light launch months were an interesting time in Destiny 2's history. It felt like it was a time where Bungie just wanted to hit the reset button on a lot of things, and give us at least something to satiate our thirst, because Beyond Light really feels more like a season as a whole, like a large season rather than an expansion. And with sunsetting and vaulting impacting the game in a pretty harsh way, it was pretty tough to remain optimistic about the future of the game. Many players shared their frustrations once again. Would the Beyond Light seasons be able to redeem this supposed MMO that has drastically shrunk over the last few months?